Economies, I guess you could say. You look at a country like India, and over there they're experiencing an IT boom, and you're seeing so many Americans actually going to India, to Bangalore, which is the Silicon Valley over there, to look for jobs. What do you think about that, Paul? Is it the beginning of a new era here?
Well, yes, Americans have been betrayed by their government, by their economists, who are all on the take from the corporations, who make more profits by sending the work abroad where it could be hired cheaper than here at home, where the U.S. economy is simply disappearing and is becoming more third world by the day. At the beginning of this century, I co-authored an article with Senator Charles Schumer from New York, the leading, one of the leading senators in the Senate, in the New York Times. It was like the first article at the beginning of the new year, and we pointed out that that this was exactly what was going to be happening. And there was a conference the day after in Washington, the Brookings Institution, in which we presented our analysis, and I said the United States would be a third world country in 20 years. And I think I actually overestimated how long the U.S. would last. It's not going to take 20 years. We're almost a third world country now.
As investors, let's get to the money angle of this, the investment angle. As they struggle to get ahead of a slowing global economy and tumultuous financial markets, our next guest says this is all just the opening act to a financial catastrophe that will make 2008 pale in comparison, David?
Mark Faber is editor and publisher of the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report. He joins us now on the phone from Hong Kong in a Fox Business exclusive. Mark, great to talk to you. You say that a big one is coming. How big, and what is it going to be?
Well, it's going to be huge, but we don't know when, because the central banks around the world, they're going to print and print and print, whereby I have to say that today's decision of Mr. Bernanke not to expand the balance sheet is the best decision I've seen for a long time from a U.S. central banker.
Interesting.
And people say the stock market went down. Wow, I lost some money. But the dollar went up.
Yeah.
We are international investors. We want to see a strong dollar. Never mind the stock market.
And that's what happened. We got a strong dollar in the wake of it, even though the market fell down. But here's a three-year picture. We're way up off the three-year lows. But you say we will revisit and see an even worse move to the downside. What would be the catalyst? And I don't know if you just heard the former Fed official Fred Mishkin here, but he said, and I quote, the Greeks just can't pay the goddamn money back. And Europe is a huge issue.
Look, Fred, I like him. He's a nice man. He's an economist. He's right. The Greeks, they cannot pay. But lots of people in the U.S. can't pay either. Most banks worldwide are bankrupt because if they had to mark to the markets their assets, there would be no capital left. And that's reflected in the new lows of bank stocks today. A lot of banks have made new lows, but the market somehow is going down because it's discounting a very bad event. I don't know what the event is. I think the world is caught in a U.S. where, as Fred mentioned, There is not a lot of inflationary pressures on consumer goods, but energy prices up, food prices up. Now, with zero interest rates, you know what will happen to your insurance premiums? They'll go up dramatically because the insurance can't earn any money on their investments. So there
All right.
will
Well,
be
Mark, let me
inflation
just ask you about the interventions, because despite the fact that governments have run out of money, they continually try to intervene in preventing disasters, whether it's in the housing market or the banking market or whatever. What happens if there's enough political pressure on those governments? It's happening here in the United States, not so much overseas, but it's beginning to overseas as well. If the public demands that they stop with the bailouts, what will happen then?
Well, the best would be that there would be no government intervention. But it's gone so far that to reduce the intervention and to lower the deficit will cause temporary pain. And believe me, we're not talking about economics here. We're talking about an election. And Mr. Obama, he wants to get re-elected. And he'll do anything to get the vote. And to get votes, you have to hand out things. So for the next, say, 12 months, on the fiscal restraint, nothing will happen. Afterwards, who knows? If he's re-elected, it will continue handouts, handouts, handouts. If he's not re-elected, who knows what the next president will do.
Mark Faber, live from Hong Kong. We thank you so much.
We're starting to hear terms like the poorest of the poor. That's those people who live at 50% or below the official poverty level. Nearly 7%, or 20.5 million Americans, are actually in that situation today. So how has the United States reached this point? And what will it take to turn things around? So when will today's president declare war on poverty? And not just declare it, but send in reinforcements. And when will the American people join him? To help me answer all those questions and more, I'm joined by Michael Snyder, the founder of the economiccollapseblog.com. He joins us from Washington State. Hey there, Michael. Let's begin with this. The U.S. Census data is out. How has President Obama responded to this new information about poverty?
Well, the Obama administration seems to think that if the stock market is surging, that everything is okay. But the truth is that the poorest of the poor, they keep increasing. While Barack Obama is saying the economy is improving, as you noted, there are now 6.7% of all Americans are living in extreme poverty. That is the highest level ever recorded. And then you just look at the regular poverty numbers. Last year, 2.6 million more Americans slipped under the poverty line. That was the most Americans to fall into poverty ever. And then if you look back, and this is part of a long-term trend. Back in the year 2000, we had 1 out of every 9 Americans living in poverty. Today, we have 1 out of every 7 Americans living in poverty.
And Michael, I know you wrote about this recently, including a part that you wrote, 19 facts about poverty that will absolutely astound you. And I wanted to put up just a few of those. These are some statistics from last year. According to U.S. Census data, the percentage of very poor went up in 300 out of 360 of the largest metropolitan areas. And the poverty rate of children increased by 22%, with 1 of 4 children on food stamps. Also, you wrote that the number of Americans on food stamps in general has increased 74% since 2007. Also, something that important.
Many Americans who wind up living on the streets never thought their economic prosperity would eventually become economic ruin.
Before I moved here, I had a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. I had 2 cars and a truck, a big backyard, big front yard, a dog in the front and a dog in the back.
Kevin Payton describes his financial stability when he was working as an electrician in Louisiana. After being laid off, he headed west to San Diego in search for work. But Payton has been unable to land a job in this expensive city, and within months ended up on the street begging for change.
They saying I'm overqualified. What that means, I do have no earthly idea. But they saying I'm overqualified, and I don't understand that. Job is a job.
Payton is not alone when it comes to formerly middle-class Americans unable to find work and ending up on the street.
I used to be a nurse assistant for convalescent hospital for the elderly.
Out of shame, Nina doesn't want to show her face on camera. She's so embarrassed about her financial situation, she hasn't come clean to her relatives about how bad things have gotten. She now sleeps on a mattress on the street corner. It's a rough life, made even tougher as police enforce measures to push homeless people out of certain neighborhoods.
Their job is to defend their country's interests, but once that job wraps up, their country has no interest in them any longer. Tens of thousands of American war veterans are simply being discarded.
They're coming home to a disproportionate rate of homelessness, of foreclosures and evictions. In 2010, a whopping 75,000 Iraq and Afghanistan veterans in the United States were homeless, were sleeping on the streets.
War veterans like 55-year-old Joe Mangione. After 16 years of military duty, he's homeless on the streets of New York with health problems he can't afford to take care of and no job.
Just to sit here like this is not easy. You know, it's degrading. You know, it's I don't know, it's just demoralizing. I have no resources, you know. I can't collect unemployment because I was hurt and I was working cash. And that unemployment runs out anyhow.
Joe says all the U.S. military machine cares about is money, while the people who risk their life and limb are disposed of once they've served their purposes of politicians.
It's just a bunch of deceptions. It's about numbers. You know, there's strength in numbers. And as long as they keep the numbers up, the recruiter gets his money, he gets his promotions, his bonuses. They care for themselves. They don't care about us. They care about their own banknotes.
The U.S. is winding down its operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, but the damage to the people who fought in those wars remains.
We have a VA system that is unable to provide us with the services that we need, the services that we're entitled to as a result of, us signing a contract and putting our lives on the line for our country.
Isn't it wonderful that the Constitution is not complex? We can read it, and most school kids should be able to understand it. that might be one of the reasons the Constitution is not taught in our public schools, because if we raise up a new generation of individuals, they might realize that this whole system of government that we're inheriting and that we're working with and trying to change is unconstitutional. We shouldn't have it. Republic, it didn't come all of a sudden. This has come slowly and insidiously. The last 100 years has been tough on the Republic. But it started immediately after the Constitution. I mean, the Jeffersonians argued with the Hamiltonians, and they talked about central banking and big government and sedition acts. And so the fights were going on very early to undermine these principles that the founders understood. But today, it's been more rapid, it's insidious and slowly. But I think what has lulled so many people to sleep has been that we have been pretty prosperous. We're still fairly prosperous. But there is a big difference today, and why the people are awakening is they know that it's an illusion. They know that the prosperity is actually going down, and they're starting to realize that this prosperity comes from too much borrowing and too much spending and too much inflation. Civilization advances when you have less power in government. The more power you have in government, the more they resort to the ancient tradition of the warrior spirit. The warrior spirit where everything is gained by going out and robbing and killing and plundering. And today it's a little bit different. They plunder through inflating the currency and taxation, but it's still plundering, but it's power in the hands of government. We had an example, a beautiful example of minimal power in our government, and then we had maximum productivity and maximum wealth. But today we think too much of the wealth and believe that government provides this, rather than understanding that wealth and prosperity comes from freedom and productivity and not from the government. There have been some serious consequences of our lack of respect and our loss of liberty and lack of concern and defense of our republic. And we're suffering the consequences. This is what we're talking about. How can we reverse this trend? I think we have to understand how it happened, what the problems were, and what we have to aim for. But we've had a lot of problems because of this. Number one, economic problems, because they do not understand the Constitution and economics on monetaries. I mean, it is very clear what we should be doing. The founders knew and understood something about inflation. The runaway inflation of the continental dollar was devastating to the economy, so they were explicit. They said no emitting of bills of credit, no printing money, no paper money, and that only gold and silver should be legal tender. Not yet. Didn't give you a signal yet. Now it comes. There is no authority in the Constitution authorizing a central bank, which means there should be no